in the United States, get all dressed up, and they would wear a hat like this. And it's a very fancy hat. The hats, they used to make it out of felt, but when it got wet, the felt would collapse and it wouldn't hold up. But then they learned how to make it out of beaver pelts, and that way, when it got wet, the water just ran off it and it held its shape. It used to be a beaver. Well, there's a little fur underneath here, a small fur, that they made the hat out of, not the tall fur on the top. It's very soft. This is about a mid-sized beaver. They'd get up to 35 or 40 pounds, really large. That's the reason the mountain men were out in the mountains, up in the Rockies and all through the plains, and wherever there were streams and lakes and rivers was a trap beaver. In 1820, they started trapping around St. Louis. That was the closest town, and they had a lot of good beaver there. And as they slowly got all the beaver trapped out, they moved further and further away from St. Louis, and they started having what they called a rendezvous, because it was the mountain men couldn't come back into St. Louis. They got so far away, and so the traders were going out to them and selling them the goods to keep them trapping the beaver. Now, the clothes I'm wearing, this is leather pants, Indian moccasins, what they call a calico shirt, is a type of cotton. The mountain men picked up a lot of styles that the Indians had wore. The choker, the thing you see hanging here is a 1824 penny, because the rendezvous ran between 1820 and 1840, and then they died out because the need for the beaver, they just didn't need them anymore, and it got played out. They trapped all of them just about in the country. And then the beads here, they wore those. And then they wore a knife. They wore two knives. One was one they skinned the beaver with, or it was a camp knife, like this here, just like a butcher knife that you'd have at home. This was called a Green River knife. It was made up in Green River in the New England country. Then they had a fighting knife, and this one here is unique. It has a bear head carved in the end of it. This is an antler off of a big elk. An elk is an animal that's like a deer, but larger than a deer. And so they have bigger elks. So we go out and live what I call living in the dirt, because you can see things get dirty pretty quick. This is an antelope dress. It's made out of antelope. This started out as a blanket called a Hudson Bay blanket. And it was made into a coat like this, which has the name, it's called a capote. This is very warm in the winter, and it also makes a good raincoat. And then the fur on here, my wife put on there for me as a birthday present. These are Wolverine front legs. So when you wrap it around, you don't get the wool rubbing on your neck, and it keeps the wind from blowing down your neck. It also has a hat, if you need one. It's a hood that comes over, and you tie it around your neck, and you stay really warm in it. And on the coat here, you can see these black marks on there. The blankets were called point blankets because these points were actually like a price tag. This is a 3.5 point blanket, so it'd take about almost 4 beaver pelts to buy this. They ran from 2 points all the way up to 10, and the more points, the heavier the wool was and the larger the blanket was. That's how the Hudson Bay Company marked it. This started out as a wolverine. You can see the 4 legs and the tail and the face. The mountain men called this thing a skunk bear because of the light coloring on the back here, like a skunk's. And then they had very long claws. This is a small one. And I sometimes stick myself with this when I'm wearing it. They're really sharp. And there aren't many wolverines left in the continental United States. I got this in 1988. And I saw the guy that made it's out of Fort Collins, Colorado, and he said to me about 2 years later when I ran across him at another rendezvous, he says, I can't even afford to buy a wolverine for myself to make a hat out of it. Price has gone up. But it's really comfortable. Ermine on the back, and then there's ermine tails, and these round circles with a cross in it, that's the Indian medicine wheel. That's their religious symbol that they've had for hundreds of years. In the wintertime, the Indians didn't wear moccasins this small. They wore ones made out of buffalo with a fur to the inside. It's buffalo, that fur. See that? And then they would just close it up and tie it up, and that way the snow couldn't get in their shoes, and they could walk around with these and keep warm. We don't have flashlights up there. We have to live by candle lanterns. and candles of such. And this is a lantern that I use. There's a candle holder in there. Just like that. You'd be surprised how much light that throws. I make my own candles, and this is a candle mold that's patterned after a candle mold from the 1700s, around our Revolutionary War time. And this will make 6 candles at a time. And it's something I do in the evening when I don't want to, there's nothing on TV to watch. It gets boring, and I'll make a couple dozen candles. I sell some of them at Rendezvous. You put the wicks through these little holes into there, and then pour your wax in here, and you make 6 candles. This here is what you'd call a war shirt. This is a Cheyenne style, and that's real hair hanging from there. Some young lady sold me their ponytails. And so I've got like real scalps on the sleeves and such. Some people get married up there, and we have some celebrations, and it's so we have something to dress up in. These beads, the blue ones, originally came over with Columbus in the 1492. They came in a 12-inch long bar, and then Spain started making them in South America when they built a factory down there. These are from the 1600s, the blue here. The black ones you see here are from Lewis and Clark. They're called Lewis and Clark beads. And then the red ones we call white hearts because the center has a white center to it. So it's called a. These are from the 1840s. These red ones. So I try to buy things that were of that time period. They have a frying pan, and when they needed a handle, they just cut a piece of wood off a tree and stuck it in there. And they had a handle, and they could fry up some meat that they shot, you know, some deer or buffalo or elk, and have a meal that way. Or they had what they called this a corn boiler. And they could cook anything in here. They could boil up rice they would have with them, any dry stuff, rice, parched corn, a thing called leather breeches, which is dried green beans. The Indians or somebody dry out the green beans, and then they could sell those. They could make their coffee in here. They could make tea in here. They got chocolate that came up out of Raton, New Mexico. The Mexicans trading up here. And it's the exact same package of chocolate that you're buying in the store now was sold back in that time period. If you're interested in having a cup of coffee, these are green coffee beans. They did not know how to preserve coffee beans at that time period. It wasn't until the Civil War time that they learned how to spray egg white on them to preserve their, because when you roast them, they get the oil starts coming out, and then that would spoil on the beans. So you had to roast your coffee beans every time you wanted to make coffee. So you got a fire started, you got your frying pan, you put some beans in here. About 20 minutes later, you got them roasted, and then you let them cool off, and then crush them up with a bag or a rag to wrap them up in, and hit them with your tomahawk, and then put it into boiling water, and in an hour and a half, you got a cup of coffee. Things took time in those days. It wasn't the hustle bustle, I want a cup of coffee in 5 minutes, or walk in the coffee shop and get it right away. No, it took time. The first knowledge of a teepee being seen on the plains was a Spanish writing in the 1600s, where they said they saw conical tents out on the plains, and that's the first word there is of the teepee being used to live in. Some of these things up here I use in my teepee. These are called parfleches. It's the type of leather they're made out of. It's rawhide, really, and so because everything has to get up off the floor because that's their living space. It's a brilliant idea, the teepee. I mean, to have a fire inside a tent, you know, and you're not without burning up the tent. Then the canvas came, and they could build. I've been in a 26-foot teepee, the largest one. But then I saw they put 2 teepees up about 20 feet apart, and then they ran a pole across there and put a sheet of canvas over that. And I mean, it's a huge camp. I've seen that a couple of times up in Montana. You just have your wood and some foodstuffs on the floor, and everything else gets thrown tied up to the rope that goes around there. And this is very sturdy. You could have 2 of these, and they could become saddle bags. They could put foodstuffs in here, combs and mirrors and sewing equipment go in here. But it's really neat. They also had buffalo bags of all different sizes to go in there. This again is made out of buffalo. Now their leather, it may sound bad, but they had brain tanned leather. They used the brains of the animal to tan the hides. It broke down the leather to where it became very soft. It almost feels like cloth because you've got to take the hide, scrape it down, and then mix the brains with water, put that on there for a day or so, wash that off, and then break it down over a sharp rock or a tree stump, and then smoke it. You put it over a very smoky fire, and that's what seals it from the water, the smoke. This is a buffalo hide here. This end is the tail, buffalo's tail. See that? And it's about 7 feet long and about 6.5 feet wide. And that's a good sized buffalo. When I first got this at home, I opened that box up. My wife said, "Take that to the garage." The smoke aroma was so strong that she didn't appreciate it. You could still smell it. It's still, because this has been done just like the Indians did it, stretched out. There's the slits on the side where it was pegged to the ground and scraped, and then the brain tanning and process, and then the smoking process. It's just shaped like a canteen, but it's a gourd. And what they do is they just take a gourd like that, and they'll cut a round hole on it, and they pour hot sand in it and shake it around till they get it all cleaned out inside. And then they'll run some paraffin or something in there, trying to coat the inside. And then this is the rawhide again, making a strap holder for it. My wife doesn't drink out of this anymore. Yes, I do. I don't have a weak stomach up there. It's we have a 5-minute rule. If it hits the dirt, you've got 5 minutes to get it up there. It's a great way to live. I enjoy it. Some of my children enjoyed it. 2 out of 3 didn't, and that's too bad. The oldest one did, and he doesn't have time to do it anymore. He's in the banking business. I mean, it's water, so if it's got a funny little taste, it won't kill you. This is a bow and arrow holder. Whenever you see the Indians in the movies, they're always holding their bow, riding on their horse. They didn't. This holds a bow. This is a Paiute bow, and it's rawhide wrapped. I shoot a 50-pound pull, and I can't hardly pull this one back at all when I string it up. It's just for looks at the moment. And this is the arrow holder, the quiver, and they put these, this is a Lakota Sioux bow holder and quiver. And they put these long fringe on it because they feel the wind blows that and gives the arrows power to fly further and straighter. This is a Lakota Sioux Black War Bonnet Society shield. I saw this in a catalog, and I liked it so much, I made it because I didn't like the price. That was it. They wanted $3.95 for it, and it still cost me about $120. This is buffalo rawhide. It's not as thick as they would have on a real shield. The real shield, they would take where the hump is on the buffalo and cut that piece out, because that was the thickest piece of leather, and then put that over a hole with hot rocks in it, and that leather would shrink up to about a half-inch thick. And that's what they used for a shield. So they could really protect themselves with it. But